sun hung low in the autumn sky, casting long shadows as the golden fields swayed gently in the breeze. It was a quiet evening on the Thompson farm, where life moved at its own unhurried pace. The air smelled of fresh earth, and the distant sound of chirping crickets filled the atmosphere, giving the sense that even nature was winding down, ready to settle in for the night. But tranquility can be a deceptive veil, and when it drapes over a place like this, it often invites trouble. As the last rays of sunlight faded, three figures descended from the nearby woods, shadows among shadows. They lurked like wolves on the prowl, eyes glinting with hunger, not for food, but for the wealth they assumed lay hidden on the Thompson farm. They were bandits, seasoned in their craft and emboldened by the tales that spoke of the farmers' supposed riches. To them, this humble farm was an easy mark, ripe for the taking. The bandit leader, a burly man with a scar snaking down his left cheek, surveyed the property. "Look at it," he whispered, nodding toward the old barn with its wooden beams weathered by time. A simple farm, but what if the old man's been holding out? His accomplices, lean and quick, nodded in agreement, their eyes darting like hungry hawks. They could imagine the treasures inside, caches of gold hidden beneath floorboards or a stash of cash tucked away in forgotten corners. Their hearts raced with the thrill of the impending heist, but little did they know the farmer wasn't merely a caretaker of the land. John Thompson was a man of grit and resolve, forged in the fires of hard work and resilience. He had seen the darker sides of life. He had farmed these fields through droughts and storms, and he knew that his peaceful existence was under siege. As the clock struck 9, the bandits crept closer to the house, but silence surrounded them like a thick fog. A light flickered from the farmhouse window. They grinned, thinking the old man must be alone, perhaps dozing off with his dinner plate still in hand. But what they saw was nothing of the sort. Inside, John was wide awake. He sat at the kitchen table, a worn map sprawled out before him. It detailed every inch of his farm with notes scribbled in the margins. He had anticipated their approach. In recent weeks, strange faces had been spotted lurking near the outskirts of his land. He had heard whispers in town about groups of bandits roaming the countryside. John knew what was coming, and he would not be caught unprepared. His weathered hands gripped the table's edge as he recalled his father's stories tales of bad men who took from those with less, who used fear as a weapon. But John refused to live in fear. He had learned that wisdom often lay buried beneath layers of silence and cunning, and sometimes the best defense isn't a weapon, it's a strategy. As the bandits approached the front door, confidence oozed from them. They shared a glance. This would be easy, they thought. But as the leader reached for the handle, John was already moving, the creak of his floorboards as silent as a whisper. He slipped into the darkness of the pantry, eyes sharp, heart pounding like a war drum. When they burst through the door, the scent of freshly cut apples filled the air, but it would not distract them. Instead, they fanned out, their jovial bravado replaced by the palpable tension of confrontation. The leader bellowed, voice echoing through the dimly lit room. With calculated calm, John pressed his back against the wall, waiting. The thud of boots on the wooden floor reverberated in his chest. He could hear their hearts racing, anticipation mingling with arrogance. This was not just a robbery, it was a battle of wills. Suddenly, a loud crash came from outside. The bandits turned toward the window, startled. John had anticipated their distraction and chosen this moment to act. He triggered a series of carefully planned sounds. A short burst of firecrackers meant to imitate gunshots punctuated the night air. The bandits recoiled, eyes wide with confusion and fear. One exclaimed, panic creeping into his tone. John seized the opportunity. He burst out of the pantry, his presence as formidable as a storm. "You picked the wrong farm, boys," he declared, stepping into the dim light. His stature, bolstered by years of laborious work, loomed large against their uncertainty. His eyes sparkled with a fierce determination that caught the bandits off guard. The leader spat, but the bravado was fading. He saw the fire in John's gaze, a fire that suggested this wasn't going to be as easy as they planned. In a heartbeat, John revealed a stack of old but sturdy barrels stacked beside the kitchen counter. Each barrel was filled not with cash, but with farm essentials tools, grains, and more. He had filled them with heavy objects, allowing him to leverage physical power against his intruders. If he couldn't rely on brute force alone, he would outsmart them. The bandits stood frozen, weighing their options, but the dusk was thick with tension. The leader sneered, attempting to reclaim control. The anger in his voice rang hollow, and John could sense their hesitation. With that, he grabbed a nearby hunting rifle, loaded and ready, even though he had no intention of using it. It was meant to intimidate, a signal that he was far from defenseless. The bandits shifted nervously, their bravado stripping away. Seeing a man who was prepared to fight for his home rattled their confidence. They were men who thrived on opportunity, not confrontation. Their eyes darted, searching for an escape. "You have two choices," John announced, voice steady. The challenge hung in the air, charged with electricity. Everything in that moment breathed tension and fear. Bandits were hunters in a chase, expecting easy prey. But John was the fox here, agile and cunning, ready to lead them into a trap of his own making. The leader's bravado began to crack. Behind him, the others whispered nervously, debating their next move. John used that moment of hesitation to his advantage, stepping decisively toward them. "You can't win this. You're not here for just some apples. You're here to gamble your lives for a few bucks. And trust me," he leaned closer, lowering his voice, "these fields hold more than just the crops you see." The bandits exchanged glances, uncertainty gnawing at their resolve. They could feel the tide turning against them. With a quick nod, the leader motioned for retreat. "We'll be back," he growled, trying to mask his fear. John stood tall, rifle still in hand, as they scrambled for the door. "You won't find any treasure here," he shouted after them, the satisfaction of his words ringing through the impending silence. With that, the bandits stumbled back into the growing darkness, their figures swallowed by the shadows of the trees. John took a deep breath and leaned against the now-closed door, heart thundering in his chest. The night wore on, gentle and forgiving once more. The crickets resumed their chorus, the moonlight spilling onto the earth's surface as if it were a tender embrace. But inside the house, John was far from relaxed. He knew they would come back. Those kinds of men didn't just give up. They would return angrier, perhaps even more desperate than before. The next time they showed up, they wouldn't be alone. He'd have to be ready. Days turned into nights, and the autumn chill began to seep into the air. John worked tirelessly on his farm, laying low during the daylight hours. Each evening, he set traps, simple devices, yet potent enough to surprise intruders. And he practiced, honing his aim, sharpening his reflexes, knowing full well that his home was worth fighting for. Then one fateful night, when the moon hung heavy and full in the sky, the earth was suddenly alive with a different kind of sound. The unmistakable crunch of footsteps in the gravel driveway. John's heart quickened. This was the moment he'd anticipated. From his post near the window, he watched as the same three figures made their way toward the farmhouse, their postures tighter, their movements eerily silent. They had returned, and this time they brought friends. The shadows now numbered 6, all shifting toward his door like reckless moths drawn to flickering flame. John's breath caught in his throat. He had to think fast. He turned, gathering his provisions, arming himself not just with his rifle but with the knowledge and respect he had earned from the land. Every time he'd toiled, every seed he'd planted, everything had been building to this moment. He opened the front door wide, the creak echoing through the night. "You're trespassers," he shouted into the brisk air, voice booming like thunder across a vast sky. Seeing the 4 additional figures standing behind the original bandits, he knew he'd have to employ every strategy he had mastered. He called. With that, he set off a series of firecrackers, the same trick he'd used in their first encounter, shaking the ground with deafening pops. The bandits flinched, casting anxious glances at one another as John slipped silently into the shadows behind an old overturned cart. The bandits, momentarily distracted, didn't see him shift until it was too late. John sprang from his hiding place, fierce and unyielding, catching the nearest one by surprise. In that instant, the fight was on. John was like a whirlwind, moving with practiced precision, flinging barrels and crates into their path, creating obstacles that threw them off balance. Fear turned to chaos as bandits stumbled over their own feet, their bravado draining with every wrong step. John yelled, his voice a roar in the darkness, but the bandits were cornered and misplaced their trust in numbers. They pushed against him violently, anger fueling their advance. Yet with every twist and turn, John knew this land. He led them to the slippery mud behind the barn where they lost their footing, shuffled to regain balance but found themselves overrun by their own momentum. One by one, they fell into the muck, tripping over each other like unruly children. Panic filled the air as they began to realize they were not just fighting against a farmer. They were wading through a landscape that was defending itself, and John was its heart. Finally, the bandit leader, covered in the muddy remnants of his own greed, stumbled to his feet, fury etched into his features. "You think you can best us?" John stepped closer, gun still firm in hand, his gaze unyielding. "But tonight, this ends here. You may think it's just land and soil, but for me, it's everything." At that moment, the bandit understood something deeper, that this man before him stood not just for the farm, but against every injustice they represented. In that gritty encounter, the lines between predator and prey had blurred. Each breath, each pulse held a meaning far stronger than wealth. Defeated, the bandits helped one another out of the mud and fled into the night, embers of their ambition extinguished beneath the dirt they once sought to claim. John watched them disappear into the trees, heart clenched but resolute. The air was still, and for the first time in days he felt the weight of the farm ease upon his shoulders. The land had stayed safe, and he had defended his home. In that moment he understood. True wealth wasn't just in the fields or hidden treasures. It lay within the strength of one's spirit, in the fight for what is rightfully yours and the determination to protect your way of life. And as the dawn broke over the horizon, the sun painting the fields with hues of orange and gold, John Thompson stepped outside, breathing the crisp morning air with a newfound conviction. He would carry on, for as long as it took, ready to face whatever the world might throw his way. The quiet farm would endure, and so would he. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying with it the sweet scent of wildflowers. Underneath a sprawling oak tree, the Thompson farm appeared peaceful, bathed in a warm, golden light. Cows grazed lazily and chickens clucked softly, creating an atmosphere of quiet contentment. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, far removed from the chaos of the outside world. But on this particular evening, the calm was about to be shattered. As twilight descended, 3 men emerged from the woods bordering the farm. Cloaked in shadows, they slinked along the dirt path, whispering to each other, a motley crew with sinister plans. Their leader, a stocky man named Mercer, had a scar running down his cheek, a permanent reminder of a fight gone wrong. He had traded words for weapons, and now he felt invincible. "They don't stand a chance," Mercer scoffed, eyeing the farmhouse in the distance. An old farmer and his famished animals. His companions, lean and wiry, nodded eagerly, their eyes gleaming with greed. They were driven by whispers of the farmer's hidden treasures, tales circulating in the nearby town about the Thompson family's supposed wealth stored away. They envisioned stacks of cash, maybe jewelry tucked beneath loose floorboards. All they had to do was take what didn't belong to them. But what they didn't realize was that John Thompson was no ordinary farmer. As he sat on his porch watching dusk settle over his land, he felt the nerves tingle in his gut. Years of tending to this place had taught him to be vigilant. Tonight, a sense of foreboding hung in the air, sharper than the chill of autumn creeping in. John rose from his chair, a tall figure with broad shoulders, a face weathered by sun and toil. He swept his gaze across the horizon, lingering on the tree line where the shadows moved. Instincts honed over decades told him that something was off. With quick precision, John locked the door and headed toward his tool shed. He hadn't been born into farming, but he had earned his place in the soil. His mind raced. He had heard the rumors in town, 2 stories of bandits roaming nearby, desperate and dangerous. But he had no intention of letting fear take root in his heart. As Mercer and his gang tiptoed closer, adrenaline surged through them, blending with arrogance. They thought it would be easy. Mercer pulled a crowbar from his pocket, the shiny metal glinting in the fading light. "This is it," he whispered, pushing the others forward, a fire igniting in their eyes, but with every step they crossed into enemy territory. John stood in the shadows of his shed, eyes sharpened, readying himself. He had prepared for this moment, knowing the land better than anyone. He had set traps, hidden behind deceptive appearances, rusty old tools disguised as weapons, barrels that could easily be overturned, and a few loud surprises up his sleeve. Back at the farmhouse, the quiet was shattered by a loud crash. The bandits had kicked the door in, naive in their confidence. "Old man," Mercer shouted, adrenaline pumping through his veins. Their voices echoed in the emptiness, but there were no answers, only eerie silence. John smiled, a mix of calm and determination settling over him. Bandits thought they were the hunters, but he had played his cards wisely. He triggered the first trap, a simple bell tied to a string dangling at the entrance. It rang out, signaling their presence like a beacon through the stillness. "Must be a cat," one of the bandits muttered, but a chill crept up Mercer's spine. He could sense that something didn't feel right. It was more than just the air around them. With every moment passing, John moved skillfully, slipping around the back of the house, unseen and resolute. He had gathered items to level the playing field, corn stalks and dirt clods. A few surprises lined up precisely. The barn's loft held old hay bales, perfect for a quick diversion. As the bandits searched the farmhouse room by room, Mercer spotted the lantern flickering in the kitchen. He yelled, rushing forward, a hand gripping the crowbar like a lifeline. He swung open the door, but instead of finding their prize, he was met with the surprise of a sturdy pile of hay bales tumbling down from the loft above. Mercer shouted, barely dodging the falling hay as he stumbled. The others scrambled to regain their footing, struggling against the unexpected chaos. It was a small victory, but one that shifted the momentum. In that same moment, John surged from the shadows and into the fray, wielding a sturdy pitchfork with determination. He shouted, instantly drawing their attention, surprising them as he charged forward like a guardian of the land. With no idea who they were dealing with, the bandits froze. John Thompson, fierce and unyielding, was not the broken old farmer they envisioned. Their bravado dissipated. Mercer raised his crowbar defensively, but confidence had slipped from his grip. "You think you can scare us?" He sneered, though tremors of uncertainty danced in his voice. "You haven't faced a farmer defending his home," John replied, voice steady and commanding, holding his pitchfork as protectively as a knight would his sword. With every passing second, the air grew heavier, brimming with potential and danger. The bandits exchanged glances, their bravado cracking as John made his move, lunging at the nearest of them, forcing him to stumble back against the wall. "You came to steal, but what you found was more than you bargained for," John said, raw conviction echoing in his words. He had always known that strength didn't always come from size or fear. It came from knowing what was right. The bandits fumbled backward, desperation setting in, but Mercer wasn't about to give up that easily. He turned and hurled the crowbar at John, but the farmer sidestepped with a grace that belied his stature, sending the weapon clattering harmlessly away. John declared, adrenaline surging as he directed his focus. With precision, he snagged the pitchfork's tines into a heavy sack of grain, spilling it across the floor. Grain poured out like a waterfall, creating a makeshift barrier. The bandits stumbled, slipping, losing their footing as they tried to maintain their balance on the slick surface. John whirled around to their remaining comrades, channeling his inner strength, intent on getting them to realize they were not welcome. Just then, one bandit rushed forward, attempting to flank John from the side. But with deft footwork ingrained from years of working the land, John pivoted, thrusting the pitchfork toward him, forcing the bandit to falter and retreat, eyes wide with fear. "This is your warning," John bellowed, voice thunderous. But desperation breeds irrationality, and in their panic, the remaining bandits began to regroup. While he scrambled to retrieve his crowbar, John knew it was now or never. With swift maneuvering, he pushed a barrel in front of the door, creating an unexpected barrier. The bandits turned, caught off guard, not realizing they were playing into his hands. The rest of the farmhouse was now a maze of obstacles they weren't prepared for, but Mercer had been around violence more than once. He instinctively hollered for retreat. He bellowed in an attempt to rally his men, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. They weren't ready for the fight that had unfolded. John seized the momentum, his heart racing with purpose. He had built this farm, poured his soul into it. With everything he had, he pushed the intruders back toward the entrance, inching them closer to surrender. "Enough!" he shouted, each word a hammer striking a nail. Their retreat turned into chaos. The slipping grain had transformed the once predictable floor into a battleground. One by one, bandits fell back, none daring to challenge the ferocity of their adversary any longer. Finally, when Mercer saw one of his comrades trip and crash against the wall, he felt the chill of realization suffuse through him. "Let's go," he shouted, scrambling back through the door where the dark wood loomed as their only exit. John stepped forward, pitchfork steady in hand, using it as a shield against their cowardice. "If you return, you'll meet more than just my farm," he warned, lowering his voice into a guttural growl. With that, the bandits fled into the night, shadows swallowed by the dense trees, leaving nothing but echoes of their retreat. It was done. The ground was now safe once more, and John stood resolute, the protector of his farm. As dawn broke on the horizon, sunbeams spilling across the fields, John took a moment to breathe. With each inhalation, the peace of the land returned, enveloping him like an embrace. He had defended what was his with courage and spirit. The farmer's heart had weathered the storm, and in the depths of night, it had become something far stronger than mere survival. It was a declaration of resolve, a promise that he would stand firm against any who dared threaten him again. The quiet farm sat silent, the cows resumed grazing, and the chickens clucked, unaware of the fury and valor that had unfolded in the shadows. John felt a new strength coursing through him, reassuring him that he could fence out more than just animals. He could guard the peace he had fought so hard to preserve. His resolve solidified like the earth underfoot, a testament to the unyielding spirit inherent in every farmer, every caretaker of the land. It was a fire that could not be extinguished, a spirit that would endure through the seasons to come. As he stepped out onto the porch once more, the sun rising brighter, John realized that this was more than a home. It was a sanctuary where dreams took root and courage flourished, a place he would defend with everything he had. And as long as there were stories whispered through the wind, the quiet farm would always echo with the legacy of resilience. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting an amber glow across the Thompson farm, bathed in tranquility. The tall stalks of corn swayed gently in the breeze, and the distant sound of a rooster echoed through the stillness. It was the kind of evening that felt timeless, serene, a promise of a peaceful night ahead. But within the shadows of the swaying fields, darkness was quietly brewing. 3 men lurked just beyond the tree line, hidden in the embracing darkness. They were not men of the land, but rather bandits, driven by desperation and shining greed. Mercer, the leader, scowled as he squinted at the farm. "Look at it," he whispered, his voice a low growl. "Looks like easy pickings, just an old man and his animals." His cohorts nodded, eyes gleaming with shared ambition. They were hardened criminals, having lived by the rules of the lawless. Steal, survive, and never look back. Tonight, they believed they'd found a rich target in a seemingly quiet place. But what they didn't factor in was John Thompson, a farmer who had toiled his whole life under the vast sky. He was no ordinary man. He was forged from the grit of his ancestors, a keeper of the land, one who had faced storms far more dangerous than mere bandits. He had learned to protect what was his through years of hardship. As the bandits whispered plans filled with false confidence, John sat on the porch, a weathered figure carved with the lines of determination and strength. He sensed a disturbance, a tension in the air as if the wind had turned against him. It was more than just a feeling, it was instinct. He had seen these menacing shadows creeping closer to his domain on other long nights before. With each second ticking away, Mercer decided they couldn't wait any longer. "Let's move," he hissed, tension crackling between them. They started toward the farmhouse, hearts pumping, intentions masked by bravado. But John wasn't just waiting. He went inside, securing the door and quietly collecting his tools, not for farming but for protection. The pitchfork leaned against the wall like a loyal companion, ready to defend his sanctuary. He had prepared for this moment. Over the years, he had anticipated threats both from nature and men like this, learning to adapt and react. Meanwhile, the bandits unhinged the back door with reckless ease. Inside, they were greeted not by riches, but instead by a world steeped in labor, the old wooden beams, the faint scent of livestock, the flicker of a lantern casting long shadows. Nothing appeared out of place, but something was unsettling. Mercer snapped, frustration clawing at him. The others shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the dark corners of the house. Their bravado was beginning to fade. "Maybe he's not home," one suggested, hope flickering for a fleeting moment. But Mercer wasn't easily fooled. "He's here. He knows we're coming." The order snapped like a whip, igniting their steps as they began rifling through drawers, checking the cabinets. But John was far from done. He had slipped out the back and positioned himself behind the barn, peering through the slats at Mercer and his crew as they stumbled through his home. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving only a few lingering rays of light. They would pay for their arrogance, he thought, steeling himself. Just as Mercer reached for a stack of weathered postcards that had once belonged to John's grandmother, they heard a faint rustling from outside. Mercer's head snapped up, tension pooling in the air. He whispered, anxiety creeping in. John held his breath, arching his body against the barn wall, watching their silhouettes dance in the dim light. The moment was ripe, like a fruit ready to fall. "Could be the old man's dog," one bandit offered, dismissing the sound, but Mercer wasn't convinced. "We stick together." With a deep breath, John prepared for a diversion. He knew this land better than they ever could. He grabbed a handful of dried corn and tossed it into the distance where an old hollow log lay. The sound of rustling echoed, drawing the bandits' attention. "Let's check it out," Mercer commanded, and they all turned in that direction, eager to confront what they thought was just a stray animal. As they crept back outside, barely stepping away from the farmhouse, John seized his chance. He moved like a shadow, sneaking up behind them with practiced silence. No wild, reckless charge. Instead, he was a hunter himself, stealthy and determined. With tight muscles and quick reflexes, he rushed forward, his pitchfork aimed, using its sturdy prongs not for harm but to intimidate. He shouted, voice booming across the field like a clap of thunder. The men spun around, eyes wide, horror playing across their faces as they caught their first real glimpse of the old farmer, no longer just a shadow on their periphery. To them, John wasn't just an old man. He was a lion defending his territory, and panic surged through the bandits. Mercer, trying to regain control, shouted back, "You think we're scared? We'll take you," but John lunged, brandishing the pitchfork as he stood tall. "You'll regret this." The bandits hesitated, caught between fear and ego. John had turned the tide. Before they could form a strategy, he hurled the pitchfork into a nearby pile of grain, allowing a dust cloud to explode around them. Grains flew into the air like confetti, disorienting them. One screamed, slipping in the grain, tumbling back into the dirt. Mercer's bravado began to crumble as he stumbled and fell. Mercer yelled, desperation shaking his voice as he tried to shove his comrades up. But John pressed forward with resolve, his presence growing more commanding with each step. That moment became a whirlwind of chaos. An overturned bucket spilled its contents, creating a slick surface, and John pushed the attack. He lunged at them again, not just a farmer defending his land, but a man reclaiming his peace. He roared, determination pouring through his every word. The bandits, once so confident, began abandoning their bravado like shedding clothes. Mercer, realizing they had underestimated their opponent, turned tail and sprinted toward the dense woods. One of his men slipped again, tumbling into a mud pile as he tried to keep pace. John held his ground. He shouted after them, a fierce grin spreading across his face. The land had been his life. The sweat of his labor was a shield against the darkness that threatened its peace. Under the starry sky, the fleeing bandits disappeared into the night, shadows escaping from the light. As their shouts faded into silence, John was left standing among the rushing wind and swirling dust, a spirit unbroken and victorious. But as the dust settled, a deeper realization washed over him. This was just one encounter. He knew they would come back, hungrier, bolder, and perhaps planning a more organized attack next time. Their desperation could lure them back like moths to a flame, and John felt unease anchor itself inside him. As he stood in the moonlight, he began plotting, formulating strategies like a seasoned general. This wasn't mere self-defense. It was protecting not just his home, but his legacy. He vowed to be prepared and vigilant. The days turned into nights and nights into weeks, but John did not falter. He sent word around town, sharing his experience with neighbors and friends. He learned of other farms facing similar threats and organized meetings. The community rallied around him, their strength merging with his resolve, building a network of watchful eyes guarding against the darkness encroaching like a hungry beast. During this time, John restructured his farm, setting up visible deterrents. He installed hidden alarms, placed strategic barrels around areas of entry, and stocked up on tools that could serve various purposes, not merely to nourish the land, but to secure it as well. He became a sentinel of sorts, guarding the very soil that had nurtured him. Months passed, the quiet life punctuated by laughter and community gatherings, but always a thrumming tension rested beneath. The bandits, however, plotted too. One starry night, the feeling of dread permeated the air again. From his perch on the porch, John gazed out over the fields, a familiar chill creeping down his spine. He felt the weight of the silence. It spoke volumes. His instincts kicked in, telling him trouble was near. They struck when the village was at its most vulnerable late at night, when shadows danced and the moon hung high. Bandits, emboldened in their numbers now, pounced on the quiet farm like a pack of wolves. But this time, John was ready. He had spent months preparing for this very moment. As the first bandit lunged through the door, expecting easy access, he was met with a blast from a hidden air horn, startling him. Confusion washed over their faces, and John took advantage of the chaos. He yelled, storming forward with determination. He wielded his pitchfork once more, every inch of him electrified with the thrill of defense. As bandits rushed in looking for weakness, they found only unshakable resolve and a fierce guardian. They hesitated, and in that split second, it was as if the air crackled. It was a moment of clarity. They weren't just fighting against an old farmer. They were fighting against the spirit of the land, against a community that had banded together, ready to protect what they held dear. John's stance firm, neighbors began to emerge from the shadows, armed with makeshift weapons and a fervor that ignited like a beacon. Shouted one of his friends. The bandits paused, confusion evident in their shifty eyes. John stepped forward, leading the charge. "You chose the wrong night to come back," he shouted defiantly. In a blur of motion, the would-be robbers were overwhelmed by the combined strength of the farmer and his friends. Bandits stumbled over each other, their thoughts spiraling into confusion, fear etched on their faces. With each swing of their tools, with each step forward, the tide of the night turned. One by one, bandits slipped through their own fear and despair, grasping at the escape that wouldn't come. In a desperate attempt, Mercer attempted to rally his men together. He shouted, panic rising in his voice. "That's right." John roared, a fire ignited in his spirit, determination blasting through as he lunged toward Mercer, face to face with the man who had underestimated him from the very beginning. But it was not just John holding strong. It was a whole community that stood behind him, bolstered by mutual respect and solidarity. It was a force that surpassed individual courage, a testament to shared dreams and unity. With one last push, they cornered Mercer against a wall, his bravado stripped away, scorn dissolved. He spat, anger coursing through him. "That's the point," John replied evenly, the calm confidence of the land pulsating through his veins. As the night wore on, the bandits were captured, their thieving dreams scattered, but John felt no joy in their defeat. Instead, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't just about protecting his farm. It was about the bonds that had been forged, friendships that had blossomed in the face of adversity. And as dawn broke over the horizon, casting golden rays across the fields, the Thompson farm stood tall, breathing anew, filled with the resonance of resilience. In the days that followed, the town rallied around the farm, helping John rebuild not just what had been lost, but also the spirit of strength and courage that had flourished amid dark times. The community came together, planting seeds of unity, crafting plans for preparedness against whatever challenges might sweep across the landscape next. John Thompson had become more than just a farmer. He had transformed into a symbolic guardian of the land, a leader among his people, teaching that real wealth was in the bonds of trust and camaraderie, nurtured through shared struggles. Years later, when the stories of that night were whispered among children and passed down through generations, they would speak of the farmer whose heart stood unyielding against darkness. Under the vast expanse of the sky, the whispers would carry on the wind, as if the very earth remembered, echoing with the vibrancy of survival, of community, and of courage that could weather any storm. In the quiet of that farm, amid the fields dancing in the breeze, stood a legacy, a promise that no bandit would ever take away the spirit of resilience woven into the fabric of their lives. And the echoes of that fight against the shadows would forever remind all who called that land home just what it meant to defend what is truly theirs. The sun dipped low on the horizon, washing the Thompson farm in a warm golden hue. The fields were alive with the soft rustling of cornstalks and the distant clucks of chickens settling in for the night. It was a tranquil scene, the kind that drew deep breaths and quiet appreciation. But as the light waned, a sense of unease lurked just out of sight, hidden behind the tranquility. On the edge of the surrounding woods, 3 figures crouched low, hearts thumping with anticipation. They were bandits, hungry and desperate, drawn to the farmer's reputation for having untold riches hidden away. Mercer, the leader with a tough exterior and a scar snaking down his cheek, peered through the brush, eyes gleaming with a mixture of greed and excitement. "Easy pickings," he whispered, his voice low and gravelly. The other 2 nodded, their expressions a mix of eagerness and nerves. They had heard stories in town, tales of a farmer who'd struck it rich during the last harvest. Little did they know, John Thompson was more than just an old farmer. He was a man shaped by years of toil, a protector of his land who would not let his world be snatched from him without a fight. As twilight set in, Mercer and his crew crawled closer to the farmhouse, their footsteps muffled by the thick underbrush. The silhouettes of the barn and farmhouse loomed ahead, and the bandits felt a thrill of arrogance rise within them. This was going to be easy. They could already taste their victory and the easy life that would follow. Inside the farmhouse, John Thompson felt a tremor in the air, an instinct honed over years of connection to the land. He sat on the porch, watching the sun complete its descent, when suddenly a small rustle caught his attention. A farmer's intuition, built through sweat and hard work, told him someone was approaching. Despite the fading light, he just knew something was amiss. He grabbed his old rifle from where it leaned against the wall, not wanting to scare off the intruders just yet, but prepared nonetheless. The rifle had only ever been used for hunting. He had sworn to himself that he would never fire it against a person. But he had also sworn to protect his home, and the stakes were high. The bandits reached the back door, Mercer taking point. "On 3, he whispered, counting down with his fingers. The thrill of adrenaline surged within them, the kind that often blinds those who seek wealth through theft. He flung the door open with a mighty kick, reveling in the surprise of it all. But inside, the house was dark and still. "He's not here," one bandit muttered, stepping cautiously into the kitchen, his foot catching on something slick. He looked down and realized it was a small pile of corn left on the floor. He exclaimed, confusion flashing across his face. Mercer brushed him aside, eyes scanning the room for anything valuable. But all he saw were the modest remnants of a farmer's life-old tools strewn about, a few potted plants, a table set for dinner. "Search everywhere," Mercer ordered, his frustration bubbling. They had come expecting wealth, but found only the quiet rhythms of farm life. Meanwhile, John leaned against a wall outside, catching snippets of their conversation, calculating his next move. He waited in the shadows, feeling the tension buzz around him like electricity. They didn't know it, but the landscape was his ally. He had set traps, gathered supplies for defense. He wasn't about to let these men rob him without putting up a fight. As the bandits searched room after room, John's mind raced. He recalled stories told around the fire, tales of brave figures who had defended their homes against overwhelming odds. With each breath, he summoned the courage he needed. Deciding it was time to act, John sneaked around the back of the house, carefully positioning himself near the barn. The first trap he had set was a decoy a tin can rig to fall and create a ruckus. He knew the sound would startle them and perhaps give him the upper hand. With a swift motion, he kicked the can, sending it tumbling noisily to the ground. Inside, the bandits froze, eyes wide as they glanced toward the unexplained commotion outside. One murmured, tension thickening in the air. "Check it out," Mercer said, regaining some of his confidence. John pressed against the barn, pulse quickening. He took a deep breath, feeling the chill of the evening air, then prepared to surprise them once again. As the first bandit stepped toward the door, John lunged out, brandishing the rifle not to shoot but as a terrifying symbol of his readiness. He shouted, his voice resonating with authority. The bandits stumbled back, shock transforming their faces. In that second, John's presence shifted the tide. Not just a farmer, but a guardian of his home. Mercer, unable to accept defeat, attempted to muster his courage. He yelled, but the cracking in his voice betrayed him. "Fear doesn't win," John shot back, gripping the rifle tightly. He pushed forward, forcing them out of the house and breaking the illusion they had built for themselves. With a quick shift in momentum, John took aim. He wouldn't fire unless necessary, but this was his last stand. The bandits began to retreat, fear plucking at their bravado like fragile threads. John yelled, a primal roar bursting forth from his chest. Just then, he triggered another hidden surprise. A series of air horns strategically placed around the property. The cacophony erupted, startling everyone nearby. The bandits yelled, stumbling over each other in their rush to escape. Mercer, seeing his plans crumble, lost his grip on the crowbar, abandonment written all over his face. As they fled toward the woods, John felt a strange mix of exhilaration and anger. He had protected his land, but he could feel them gathering strength to return. This wouldn't be the end. It was just a prelude to a more challenging chapter ahead. The sight of their retreating figures faded into the night, but he could still hear their shouts echoing through the trees. They would return, he knew, and he had to be ready. In the following weeks, John prepared his defenses. He enlisted the help of neighbors who rallied to support him. They toiled side by side, fortifying the barn and laying traps along the perimeter of his property. Every inch of the farm became a sanctuary, a place where unity thrived against malevolence. As the harvest moon glowed high in the sky one crisp evening, tension thrummed back in the air. John gathered his neighbors, sharing tales of past battles, how communities had come together against threats, focusing on resilience and teamwork. That night, John was filled with a sense of camaraderie. They strategized, sharing laughs and stories over hearty meals. Each neighbor brought something different to the table, ideas, tools, and strength. They felt like an army, ready to protect what they loved. And then, just as they finished planning, they heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps once again mingling in the shadows. Mercer and his crew were back, emboldened by their numbers and thirsting for revenge. They believed they could crush the farmer's spirit this time. "Let's split up," Mercer instructed, eyes gleaming with a dangerous mix of excitement and anger. "We'll catch him off guard." John and his neighbors held their breath, watching from the shadows as the bandits slipped closer. They understood the stakes. This was about survival, defending their lives and homes. As the bandits approached the house, John and his allies took their positions, hearts pounding like drums. The quiet of the night was tangible, anticipation thick in the air. Then, when the bandits kicked open the door to the farmhouse, John had already set the plan into motion. He and his team executed their strategy with precision. The air horns blared, drowning the bandits in chaos. John shouted, and they erupted into action, rushing towards the intruders with makeshift weapons, pitchforks, garden hose, anything they could wield in defense. The bandits stumbled, overwhelmed by the sudden wave of courage that rushed towards them. John led the charge, hitting danger head-on. He bellowed, pushing through the ranks of his neighbors, their spirits igniting into a furnace of strength. The bandits were cornered, desperately trying to rally but faltering against the sheer determination of the farmers. Some stumbled as John pushed through, confident and unwavering, his intentions dripping with raw protection. The fight was fierce but short-lived. It didn't take long for the bandits to realize they were outmatched. One by one, they fell back, fear flashing in their eyes. Mercer, full of anger and desperation, tried to pull them together one last time. He shouted, but even he felt the tide turning against him. John thundered, the authority in his voice eclipsing all doubt. It was more than just a farmer speaking. It was the voice of a community standing united. As the bandits turned to flee into the dark woods, John felt a swell of triumph. They had faced the storm and emerged victorious. The farm remained safe, the bonds between neighbors fortified by that dangerous evening. With adrenaline coursing through his veins, John stood tall, heart still racing. The embers of battle faded into the night, leaving a new understanding in their hearts. They were not alone. Together, they had become a fortress, and that bond would be unbreakable. In the days that followed, the farm thrummed with vitality, the crops flourishing under the sun. The threat of bandits now seemed a distant memory, a lesson etched firmly in the foundation of their lives. John continued to work alongside his friends, harvesting not just the land but the spirit of resilience that had taken root. Whenever doubt whispered in the wind, they would remember that night, the call to defend what's theirs. Years passed, and the stories of that fateful evening were shared around fires. Generations would retell how the quiet farmer became a brave guardian, how a community united against darkness found strength in their bonds. Through it all, the Thompson farm stood proud under the canopy of stars, a testament to resilience, courage, and the undeniable power of standing together. And when the wind swept across the fields, it carried with it the echoes of that fateful night. The night when bandits tried to strike at the heart of the farm, but found a family instead, unyielding and fierce in the defense of their home. The wind howled softly through the fields, where tall grass swayed like waves in a vast ocean. The Thompson farm stood quiet and serene, the last golden rays of light painting the barn a rich orange. It was a peaceful evening in late summer, the kind of calm that lulled people into a sense of safety. But in the shadows, trouble brewed. 3 men nestled in the thick cover of the trees, their faces hardened by a life of crime. Mercer, the leader, ran a calloused hand over his stubbled chin, squinting at the farmhouse in the distance. His eyes glinted with impatience. Look at that place, an old man and a rundown barn. His companions exchanged nervous glances. They were seasoned thieves, desperate for a score that would change their fortunes. But even they felt the weight of unease. Something about the stillness of the farm felt off. One of them mumbled, shifting his weight uneasily. It was a question that echoed through their minds, whispering doubts amidst their greedy aspirations. "Trust me," Mercer snapped, his impatience flaring. "We need this. Let's stick to the plan." As they slunk forward, a certain darkness accompanied their steps, a palpable tension that hung in the air. Meanwhile, John Thompson, the farmer, sat on his porch, the sun's last glow casting long shadows over his weathered face. Years of hard work, sweat, and toil etched into every line of his skin. He sensed the shift in the air, the quiet broken only by the distant chirp of crickets. It was a feeling he had learned to respect. Long before this day, whispers of bandits had trickled through town, warnings about lost livestock and empty barns. John knew the stories all too well, the desperate men who roamed the countryside, searching for the easy pickings that came from a hard-working farmer's patience. As he sipped his coffee, the shadowy figures appeared at the edge of his property. Instinct kicked in, a gut feeling honed over the years. He had to protect what was his. The farmhouse stood as a testament to his hard work, and he wouldn't let it fall into the hands of thieves. The bandits neared the back door, fear now trailing behind them like a loose thread. Mercer's bravado slowly faded as the reality of the looming farmhouse settled in. "On 3, he whispered, counting down with his fingers. But just as Mercer lifted his foot to kick the door open, John stood, gripping his old rifle. It wasn't loaded with bullets. It was filled with purpose and raw determination. As the bandits kicked open the door with a loud bang, John felt the weight of every second press against him. Inside the farmhouse, the atmosphere shifted. The faint smell of baked bread mingled with the woodsy scent of the old beams, creating an ambience that felt surprisingly welcoming. But the bandits weren't here to enjoy the scenery. They were here for a treasure they believed to be hidden somewhere in the house. Mercer ordered, The urgency in his voice echoed off the walls, spurring his men into action. They fanned out, rummaging through drawers and inspecting cabinets. They found nothing but the remnants of a humble life, a few worn photographs, an old skillet, and remnants of a recent meal. While they searched, John moved quietly, shifting from the porch into the shadows. The corners of his mouth turned up slightly. The fearlessness locked inside him was ready to spring. He knew the land better than any outsider ever could, and he had laid traps for nights just like this. From the pantry, he skillfully triggered a series of simple devices he had crafted. A bell attached to a string jingled sharply, breaking the stillness and ringing out like a siren call. One bandit yelled, the color draining from his face. Mercer barked, though uncertainty crept into his tone. John seized the moment, moving stealthily through the house. He needed to redirect their focus. Outside, he kicked a few hay bales positioned strategically by the barn, sending them tumbling. The noise reverberated in the still air, a crackle of chaos that startled the intruders. Mercer shouted, leading the way with renewed vigor, trying to prove his courage. As they moved toward the source of the sound, John slipped into the side of the barn, quickly peeking at where the intruders had fallen for his distraction. They were distracted and disorganized, the fear visible on their faces. He could launch his plan. At that moment, adrenaline surged through John's veins, propelling him into action. He yelled, voice steady and booming. He was both a farmer and a defender, standing tall like a sentinel against the looming threat. The bandits spun around, eyes wide. They had expected an old man, not someone ready for a fight. Fear seeped into their arrogance, and for the first time, doubt clouded their thoughts. One of them muttered, realizing they had walked into a nest of danger. John pressed forward, pitchfork in hand, stepping out from the shadows like a force of nature. He raised the pitchfork, not with rage, but with the quiet fury of a man unwilling to back down. Mercer barked back, trying to hold his ground, but the tremor in his voice revealed his uncertainty. "You'll find nothing here but the spirit of a man ready to defend his home," John declared, voice low and fierce. He held the pitchfork with both hands, the old wood familiar against his palms. In that moment, everything hinged on a fragile balance between fear and courage. The bandit leader threw caution to the wind, lunging at John in a reckless attempt to close the distance. But John was prepared. He sidestepped with agility born from years spent tending to the farm. As the bandit stumbled forward, John took the chance, thrusting the pitchfork toward him just enough to send him sprawling back. The bandits erupted into chaos, their bravado crumbling in the face of John's unexpected ferocity. Mercer shouted, desperation now bleeding into his command. But one by one, the bandits faltered, overwhelmed by the realization that they had underestimated the man they came to rob. John stood resolute, heart racing like the thundering hooves of a wild horse. He had fought hard for this place, and he wasn't about to let fear dictate his fate. With a quick movement, he triggered a rusted alarm bell he had set across the barn. The clash rang out, filling the air with urgency. Bandits froze, their eyes darting. One of them shouted, the facade of bravado crumbling. They scrambled through the door, slipping and falling over each other as chaos engulfed them. John called after them, his heart swelling with both relief and a fierce pride that he had stood up against adversity. As the bandits fled into the night, their shouts echoed against the backdrop of a tranquil farm, a stark reminder of the battle that had just unfolded. John stood tall, breathless but victorious, feeling the adrenaline ebb away. But he wasn't naive. He knew they would return. The threat had only slipped into the darkness, and he felt a dread hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Days turned into weeks, the farm moving with the rhythm of life, the smell of fresh earth and the laughter of his neighbors filling the air. Yet the shadow of the bandits lingered. John reinforced his defenses while sharing stories with locals, the chilling encounter at the forefront of their minds. He became a part of the community's lifeblood, warning everyone of the lurking dangers. Together, they pooled resources, sharing tips and tricks for fortifying their homes. John's initiative strengthened bonds, transforming fear into a collective spirit of resilience. Then one night, long after the sun had retired, he was jolted awake by a rustling sound that sent chills down his spine. John slipped out of bed, heart pounding as instincts kicked in. The sense of danger pulsed in his veins. Outside, darkness blanketed the land, and John moved through the quiet, hunting for the source of the noise. He realized with growing dread that the bandits were here again, emboldened by their previous shortcomings. He crouched low, preparing for the worst. In the distance, he spotted shadows slipping across the field, a silent march toward the farmhouse. They tried to approach quietly, but rustling leaves and the crunch of old twigs betrayed them. "Ready yourselves," John whispered to his neighbors who had braved the night to stand beside him. The tension thickened, uniting them in shared determination. "Remember the last time," one neighbor urged, gripping a makeshift weapon, eyes bright with resolve. Another whispered anxiously, "Fight for what's ours." John's voice held conviction, the steadiness familiar and reassuring. As the bandits neared the farmhouse, a flash of light ignited across the yard. They had returned, fueled by a reckless desperation. Mercer shouted, his bravado hardening the malicious intent behind his words. John stepped onto the porch, heart hardened with resolve. He called, voice filled with authority echoing through the night air. The bandits halted, confusion replacing their surprise. A bandit blurted, underestimating the collective strength that stood behind John, resolute and ready. The battle erupted, a clamor of noise blending with the rustling night. John dove into action alongside his friends, working like a well-oiled machine. They surrounded the bandits, who found themselves outnumbered and overwhelmed. Mercer shouted, trying to pull them together, but chaos reigned. Friends fought not just for land, but for their very lives, fortified by the bonds of loyalty and shared struggle. With every thrust of their makeshift weapons and every determined shout, they sent the bandits scrambling. The fear that filled the air transformed into a rallying cry. This was more than just a fight for physical space. This was a fight for identity. John could feel the power of unified spirits rising, an army standing tall against those who sought to undermine their lives. As the bandit crew faltered, the command from John grew fierce. "Show them what we're made of." The bandits' resolve began to crumble under the sheer force of John's spirit and the collective strength of the community. They had galloped into battle expecting to conquer, but wound up ensnared in their own hubris. One by one, bandits scattered, slipping through the tall grass, abandoning Mercer as he bellowed for them to stay. But courage had transformed into fear, and without one another they were nothing. John called after them as they fled into the darkness, heart soaring with triumph. When the air settled and the moonlight illuminated the remaining few, his friends erupted into cheers. They had faced the darkness together and emerged victorious. Sauce for the soul stirred within John. He had not only protected his farm, he had nurtured a community. There under the stars, they found strength, realizing that safety came from more than just security. It came from the human bond and an unyielding spirit. Days turned to months, and the legend of the Thompson farm spread like wildfire. Farmers far and wide spoke of the night when a quiet farm turned into a fortress of courage. John Thompson became a symbol of defiance, a guardian standing watch over his land. Children played in the fields, laughter echoing under the sun. The threatened farm transformed into a sanctuary of hope, bustling with life, creativity, and the spirit of unwavering resolve. And as the seasons ebbed and flowed, John understood something profound about the resilience of community. Strength was born in unity, and every fire ignited by fear became a beacon illuminating the way forward. The Thompson farm thrived not just as a plot of land, but as a testament to the indomitable human spirit, a place where stories of bravery transcended time, echoing through the generations. In the heart of the cornfields, the whispers of those bandits faded away, buried beneath the laughter and labor of a community that had learned to stand together, no matter how fierce the storm. And with dawn breaking over the horizon, it marked not just a new day, but a new chapter, rich with courage, kinship, and an unwavering promise to defend what was theirs. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a soft golden hue over the Thompson farm. The red barn stood proudly amidst the sprawling fields of corn that swayed gently in the evening breeze. Everything about the setting radiated peace, the kind of peace that lulled the senses and made one forget the dangers lurking just beyond the horizon. But as twilight embraced the land, 3 figures crept through the underbrush at the edge of the woods. Bandits, shadowy and determined, moved like ghosts, their eyes narrow and hungry. Mercer, the leader, wore a sinister grin, his scarred cheek telling stories of past encounters. "This old farm is ripe for the picking," he murmured, scanning the property. "An old man and some animals." His companions shared nervous glances, their bravado faltering in the fading light. They were hardened criminals, but even they felt the weight of unease. The air crackled with tension, like a storm waiting to break. Inside the farmhouse, John Thompson stirred in his rocking chair, wrapped in a patchwork blanket. He had spent a lifetime working this land, building a life woven into every furrow of the fields. Years of toil had given him an acute sense of awareness, a sixth sense that warned him when something was about to go wrong. Just then, that gut feeling pricked at him like a thorn. Outside, he noticed a flicker of movement near the edge of the trees. He narrowed his eyes and rose, the creaking of the floorboards breaking the tranquil silence. There they were, 3 men lurking, their intentions cloaked in darkness, and that is all he needed to know. The bandits had seen his farm as an easy target, a quiet slice of serenity, but appearances can be deceptive. John was ready. He had sensed this moment coming for weeks, preparing in secret, knowing that the safety of his home depended on his actions now. His hand brushed over the rifle propped against the wall, not loaded, but the mere idea of it offered a thrill of confidence. He had spent years working the land, with calloused hands and a steadfast spirit, and he wasn't going to let a bunch of thieves tear down what he had built. As Mercer and his crew edged closer, John slipped quietly out the back door and into the shadows of the barn. He knew every nook and cranny of his property, and he planned to use that knowledge to his advantage. Inside, he gathered his tools, an old pitchfork, a few barrels, and some scattered hay bales stacked in the corner. Mercer muttered as they neared the farmhouse. He kicked the door in, reveling in the adrenaline. Search everywhere. Once inside, the bandits fanned out. They rifled through drawers, grumbling at the ordinary items lying around: knives, old boots, and family photographs. There was no stash of gold, no hidden treasures, only remnants of a simple life built from hard work and love. But John waited, a predator poised in the shadows, aware that every second mattered. He had set traps across the property, simple yet effective. As he watched the bandits clash with the mundane inside his home, he triggered the first distraction. A hidden bell strung near the pantry, ringing out like an alarm. One bandit yelped, his confidence shaking. "Let's get back to searching," Mercer barked, annoyance seeping into his voice. But John seized that moment. He dashed around the side of the barn, gathering his resolve. He could hear the bandits muttering behind him, unsure and restless. The quiet atmosphere outside formed a perfect shroud, and he felt the thrill of the fight bubble within him. With a swift motion, he kicked over a nearby barrel, sending the contents spilling out: corn, the rich harvest he had nurtured. It rolled and scattered across the ground, creating a soft crunch that broke the stillness. As the bandits stepped outside to investigate, John jumped from behind the barn, gripping the pitchfork tightly. He bellowed, his voice steady but filled with authority. They turned, eyes wide, disbelief washing over them. They had expected an easy mark, a feeble old man. Not this fierce defender of a legacy. Mercer scoffed, but the words wavered. He was caught off guard by the intensity radiating from John, a fire fueled by years of hard work and sacrifice. John declared, raising the pitchfork as a shield. A rush of adrenaline coursed through him. This was not just about his farm, but a battle for his life and dignity. As Mercer lunged forward in a last-ditch effort to claim victory, John stepped aside and thrust the pitchfork into the ground, using it to gain leverage. It was a calculated maneuver, sending Mercer stumbling into one of the barrels, his bravado slipping further away. Mercer shouted, desperation flooding his tone. The other bandits hesitated, caught in a moment of disbelief. They had come expecting an easy score, but were now faced with a poke of revenge. With determination, John pressed forward. He kicked over another barrel, creating a distraction, forcing them to lose their footing. Corn scattered everywhere, creating a perfect slick surface. "You picked the wrong time and place," he declared, voice unyielding as he tapped into the raw spirit that had sustained him through countless harvests. The bandits slipped, struggling to regain their footing on the transformed battlefield of the farm. Panic flickered across their faces as they stumbled into one another, disorganized and unsure. Shouted one of the bandits, sensing the tide turning. They turned to flee, but John wouldn't let them escape without a fight. He yelled, finally wielding the pitchfork like a knight's weapon, directing it at their backs. Just as the sounds of chaos between them reached a crescendo, he unleashed one final trap. A prepared set of air horns roared to life, echoing through the silence like a siren. The sound sprayed terror into the bandits' hearts, making fear and confusion blend perfectly. "Run!" They shouted, fear melting their initial bravado into full retreat. They sprinted back toward the woods, panic weaving through their minds. John stood at the edge of his property, chest heaving with exhilaration and disbelief. He had defended his land, the very roots of his identity and family. The adrenaline surged through him like a wild river as he relished in the victory earned that day. But it was also bitter. He understood that these men would not simply walk away and forget. They could easily regroup and try again, and raiding his farm was now a matter of pride for them. The thought nagged at him. Days turned into weeks, and while life resumed its semblance of normalcy, John remained vigilant. He fortified his defenses, crafting new traps, each one designed with cleverness and care. He enlisted the help of nearby farmers, gathering strength from shared stories and experiences. "A quiet farm isn't a weak one," John would say, his voice steady, methodical. "We must watch each other's backs." Tragedy had a way of stirring community. Barbecues turned into strategic meetings. Friendships deepened through shared worries of the threat that loomed over their heads. They shared stories of resilience, strength, and the unwavering power of unity. Then, as harvest time approached, the bandits reared their ugly heads again. Under the cover of night, they crept toward the Thompson farm, emboldened by the thought of taking revenge. Their shadows slithered through the tall corn stalks, plotting their path to the farmhouse. But John was ready. He sensed their approach in the very air, filled with anticipation. The tightness in his chest reminded him of the first time they had come, and he embraced the fear like an old friend, turning it into action. "Tonight we stand together," he whispered to the neighbors who had gathered with him. They formed a protective circle around the farm, encircled by determination. The air was rich with tension, and the stars above shone bright, a silent promise of hope. When the bandits kicked in the door yet again, it was different. There was no longer surprise lurking in John's eyes. He had gained something invaluable in the meantime, support from those who understood the stakes. John shouted, rallying his allies. And just as the bandits took their first steps inside, the air horns erupted once more, filling the night with chaos. Startled, the bandits stumbled back, confusion spilling across their faces. But as John and his friends rushed into the fray, they were met not just with pushback but with a roaring wave of strength. John charged forward, adrenaline pumping. "You think you've won," he bellowed, a fire igniting in his chest. The intruders scrambled, caught between fear and disbelief. John and his neighbors formed a wall, determined to protect their land. The fight unfolded like a flurry of movement, a shifting dance of bodies, pitchforks, and shovels raised high, voices echoing through the night air as they rallied together. In that whirlwind of action, the bandits faltered, and one by one, they were sent reeling back. John directed his friends, giving commands that ignited the spirit of everyone present. They fought with not just tools, but the fierce love they held for their community, the spirit of what they had crafted together. Mercer, still caught in his delusions of grandeur, attempted to rally his men one last time. "Don't give up." But desperation was a thin light and the farmers were a storm. John shouted back, his spirit unyielding. As the battle raged on, it became clear the bandits were outmatched. Fear flooded through them, their bodies moving like marionettes, each step a retreat into uncertainty. Finally, they turned to flee, eyes wild with panic. John stood tall as they vanished into the shadows, triumphant in their defeat. The air settled into quiet once more, the adrenaline slowly fading, but the energy left behind was palpable. The farmers erupted into cheers, voices mingling in a vibrant celebration of resilience and unity. They had faced danger and emerged stronger. In that moment, John felt the weight of everything lift. He had defended not just his farm, but the heart of their community. He looked out at his neighbors, faces glowing under the moonlight, proud and valiant. The rest of the evening transformed into a neighborhood gathering, stories shared, laughter echoing under the stars, the bond between them growing deeper and stronger. They had found a way to turn fear into a shared experience, creating a legacy of courage they would pass down through generations to come. From that point forward, the Thompson farm flourished, not merely as a place for crops and animals, but as a symbol of strength and the undying human spirit. The shadows that once threatened their peace fell silent, replaced by the deep-rooted knowledge that they were far better prepared for whatever might come next. And as the sun rose over the horizon, sweeping fields bathed in light, John Thompson knew in his heart that they had not just protected their land, they had fortified their souls. And that strength, born of unity, would carry them forward into brighter days ahead. The sun dipped low over the Thompson farm, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. It was a typical evening, the kind that made you believe in the peace of rural life, where the world felt far away and troubles seemed to fade into the horizon. But beyond that tranquil facade, danger lurked like a wolf in the shadows. 3 figures crept through the long grass at the edge of the woods, each step calculated and quiet. Mercer, the leader, was a man hardened by years of hard living. Scars marked his face like battle wounds. He pointed toward the farmhouse, a sinister grin stretching across his lips. That place is ripe for the picking, just an old man and his farm. His 2 companions, skittish and unsure, exchanged glances filled with doubt. Their lives had been spent prying wealth from the vulnerable, yet they felt the shift in the air. The old cliches about farmers being tougher than they looked rang in their ears, but greed drowned out their intuition. "Let's go," Mercer urged, voicing the reckless bravado they all shared. In the farmhouse, John Thompson sat on his creaking porch, sipping a cup of steaming coffee, the comforting aroma wafting through the evening air. Years of hard work etched deep lines on his face, but those lines also held stories of resilience and grit. He could sense something amiss. The evening felt different, charged, almost electric. Through the gathering dusk, he spotted movement along the tree line. His heart raced as instinct kicked in. He placed his coffee cup down carefully, eyes narrowing at the approaching shadowy figures. He had heard whispers of trouble in town, tales of bandits haunting farms nearby. It seemed the time had come to test his resolve. John rose, moving quietly inside his home. He had prepared for this moment. He had seen the signs and set his traps well in advance. A chill ran down his spine, not from fear but from anticipation. They would not take what was his without putting up a fight. Mercer and his bandits reached the back door of the farmhouse, their hearts racing with reckless excitement. Mercer commanded, ready to kick the door in. John, still hidden inside and waiting for the right moment, gripped the handle of an old rifle. Loaded? No, but it was a symbol, a reminder of his determination. As Mercer kicked the door open, the sound reverberated through the walls, shattering the stillness like glass. A rush of adrenaline surged through John, and he took a deep breath, ready to meet the intrusion head-on. Inside, the bandits were greeted not by riches but by the mundane scene of farm life. An empty table set for dinner, photographs hanging on the wall depicting happier times. This was not what they had expected. One of them muttered, glancing nervously around. "He's gotta be here," Mercer snapped, frustration bubbling over. John, slipping out the back, darted around the side of the barn. He knew every inch of his land, and he had planned for this. Quick as a flash, he reached into a concealed stash and pulled out an old pitchfork, steadying his resolve. It was time to protect what he had built: his life, his dreams, his home. Outside, Mercer stumbled across stray equipment, cursing under his breath. "This is it. Let's just check the rooms upstairs," another bandit suggested, his voice quaking slightly. Unease brewed amongst them as they ventured deeper into the home. Time felt thick and heavy for John as he picked up the rhythms of their movements through the thin walls. He set his traps all over the farm, disguised alarms and barriers that would give him the upper hand. He had grown up with tales of bandits, stories of farmers who fought back, and he wouldn't be one of those who fell victim. As the thieves rummaged through drawers and cabinets, John made his move. He triggered the first distraction. He had laid the bell attached to a string at the back door. It jingled loudly, cutting through the silence and startling the intruders. One bandit exclaimed, fear creeping into his voice, their confidence shattered if only temporarily. "Just an old cat," Mercer insisted, but uncertainty flooded his tone. Taking advantage of their distraction, John slipped into the barn, his heart pounding. He arranged barrels filled with hay and grain, setting them in a way that would cause chaos with one swift move. As the bandits grew more unsteady, John kicked over a barrel, sending it rolling toward the farmhouse. The sound created a small avalanche of corn that trickled out, a slick warning of what was to come. The bandits exited the house, growing frantic as the tension mounted. They were not just looking for treasure now, they were suddenly invested in survival. Mercer shouted, full of bravado, stepping outside into the night. But as they turned toward the source, John launched himself out from behind the barn. He boomed, brandishing the pitchfork like a knight ready for battle. The bandits were taken aback, caught entirely off guard. They hadn't expected an old farmer to stand so fiercely against them. Mercer's bravado evaporated in an instant. He thrust out his hand, trying to rally his men. "What are you doing?" A coat of fear painted their faces, but desperation propelled them forward. Mercer lunged, aiming to tackle John, but John was ready. With a sidestep, he avoided Mercer's grasp, thrusting the pitchfork toward him with calculated precision. The pitchfork caught Mercer in the shoulder, forcing him to tumble back. The other bandits gasped, their fear overtaking courage as chaos erupted. The bandits stumbled over one another as they backed away, their bravado stripped to shreds. The farmer's resistance became a rallying cry, and John pressed forward, adrenaline coursing through him like wildfire. One bandit shouted, desperation fraying the edges of his voice. But the sound of their retreat was cut short as John set off the next hidden trap, an array of fireworks rigged to explode with brilliant colors. The sound was deafening, the lights bursting like vivid stars against the dark sky. With every bang, the bandits jumped, their hearts racing. In the ensuing chaos, they turned to flee, falling over themselves in utter disarray. But John was not finished yet. He charged after them, pitchfork raised, unyielding in spirit. He yelled, giving the bandits no chance to regroup. Mercer stumbled and fell, his bravado evaporating in the face of panic. "Let's go," he bellowed, eyes wild with fear. They rushed away from the farmhouse, hurtling toward the trees, desperate to escape the consequences of their greed. John stood at the edge of his property, chest heaving, heart racing with the rush of victory. He had defended his home, but as he began to relish the quiet that followed, the reality washed over him. They would return, that much was certain. Bandits like Mercer were relentless. They would not let this failure go so easily. Days flew by, the calm settling gently over the Thompson farm, but John remained vigilant. He strengthened his defenses, laying more traps, practicing with his pitchfork until it felt like an extension of his own body. He continued to gather support from neighbors, their stories woven together by shared fears and the determination to protect what was theirs. As summer faded into autumn, the nights grew colder, and whispers of bandits began to sneak into his conversations again. Late nights around the fire would often spark discussions about the lurking dread, an all too familiar heaviness in the air. John was ready, not just with traps, but with the community behind him. They pooled their resources, leaned on one another, forming friendships with each gathering. They reinforced fences, created lookouts, and traded stories of resilience. One crisp evening, the moon hung high and full in the night sky. John sat by the fireplace with his neighbors, warmth cradling them in shared companionship. Laughter broke through the tension, easing their worries, but John's instincts resurfaced, prickling at the back of his mind. Suddenly, a flurry of movement rustled outside. Shadows shifted, and his heart raced as he recognized the unmistakable sound of footsteps creeping closer. The bandits had returned. John commanded, adrenaline surging as he motioned for his neighbors to gather their makeshift weapons. The laughter faded into a silence thick with anticipation. With the moon illuminating the yard, the bandits emerged from the shadows, their faces twisted in determination. Mercer was leading them again, a dangerous glimmer in his eyes. He shouted, "We take it all." Panic rippled through John and his neighbors, and they sprang into action. They had prepared for this moment. They wouldn't let fear drown them again. John commanded, heart pounding as he gathered his close friends around him. They could hear the bandits trampling the corn, a cacophony echoing through the night like a warning bell. John yelled, and just as the intruders crept too close, a series of firecrackers exploded, creating a din that startled the night into chaos. The bandits faltered, the overwhelming sound crashing over them like a wave. John rushed forward, pitchfork aimed high, with his neighbors right behind him, driven by the fury of shared purpose. John shouted, closing the distance between himself and the enemy. The fight erupted like a storm, fierce and unrelenting. Bandits stumbled, caught off guard by the farmers' resolve, their desperation morphing into reckless mistakes. The air crackled with a mixture of adrenaline and fear as John led the charge, knowing that this battle was about far more than defending land. It was a fight for their very lives. But just as the tide seemed to shift, a loud crash echoed through the darkness, snapping John's focus. It was another blast, but this one was different. The ground shook beneath him, like an earthquake in the night, and he realized it wasn't coming from within the farm, it was from the trees. A fire ignited suddenly across the fields, spreading like wildfire, igniting the air in a whirlwind of chaos. The flash illuminated Mercer's face, a shocked expression plastered across his features. "Run!" he shouted, but it was too late. John's heart sank as he realized the implications. The bandits had set something in motion, but he couldn't turn back now. The stakes had risen higher than ever. He had to fight through the chaos, and he had to do it quickly. As the fire consumed brush and corn stalks alike, flames shot up to the night sky, casting shadows that danced like specters. John yelled, refusing to let fear wrap around his heart, but the panic was palpable. One neighbor shouted, eyes wide with terror. John roared, but the flames roared louder, licking at their heels as they fought to keep their footing. What began as a battle for the farm was quickly shifting, transforming into a desperate struggle against an enemy more powerful than they had ever imagined. The bandits, sensing the chaos of fire joining their side, scrambled forward, emboldened by the inferno around them. With every step taken, John felt the world shift beneath him. He fought through the chaos, adrenaline serving as his only compass. He shouted, urgency driving him. But just as it seemed the tide might turn, the flames surged closer, igniting a new reality. Panic-stricken faces turned toward John, seeking something in his gaze, a sign that they could still defeat the danger at hand. Mercer caught John's eye, a cruel smile creeping onto his lips as the fire danced behind him. "You're fighting a losing battle, farmer." In that moment of chaos and confusion, John felt his heart race, but he also felt something else, a fire igniting within him, fueled by the memories of every challenge he had faced, every moment he had triumphed against the odds. He shouted, the word escaping his lips like a battle cry. As the flames roared and shadowy figures battled in the heat, John understood the fight was just beginning, a battle not just for his farm, but for the very essence of hope, unity, and resilience. As the inferno blazed around him, it was no longer just a fight for survival. It became a fight for the soul of something far greater. And as the stars flickered overhead, revealing the precarious truth, they stood on the precipice of their greatest challenge yet, knowing full well that victory or defeat hung in the balance, waiting for the next bold move to determine their fate.